Hello everyone, welcome to today's class, and today our title is Vocational Violence. Let's move on to language focus. 1번. There are usually a few weapons involved, and it's not unheard of for somebody to get shot. Our first focus today. It's not unheard of. Now we use it's not unheard of to suggest that something happens from time to time. Now, from time to time means 가끔, right? Sometimes. But in this situation, it's more about like 뭐 어떤 상황 가끔 생기다 그리고 뭐 자주 생기는 상황 아닌데 가끔 생겨요. It's not something that happens all the time, but it happens sometimes. Another I guess synonym of it's not unheard of, it's not unusual. People say this as well. It's not unheard of and it's not unusual. They mean the same thing. Okay. So let's have a look at our first example. It's not unheard of for new businesses to lose money for several years before succeeding. So, 새로운 사업이 성공하기 전에 몇 년 동안 손해를 보는 것은 전례가 없는 일이 아니다. So, there is a like very surprising statistic that new businesses, over 90% of new businesses fail as well. So it is not unheard of for new businesses to lose a lot of money for several years before succeeding. So it means usually new businesses lose a lot of money, or sometimes, should I say, it should be sometimes new businesses lose a lot, well, let's just say lose money for several years before succeeding. This has the same meaning. All right. The next example. It's not unheard of for people to change careers half a dozen times or more. So how much is a dozen? A dozen equals 12. But when people say half a dozen, that obviously means 6, but it's also sometimes not used literally. Some people just use it as another way of saying a few, even though a few equals 3, right? Sometimes people use it like and more, but not all the time. But when people say a half a dozen times, sometimes they mean a number around 6. Like, sometimes people use this expression to mean a number around 6. If you're counting eggs, for instance, then that's a literal meaning, but some people get lazy with counting around 5 or 6, 7, etc. So they'll say a half a dozen times. Not always literal. Okay, so it's not unheard of people to change careers half a dozen times. So 사람들이 직업을 몇 번 이상 바꾸는 것은 전례가 없는 일이 아니다. So it's not uncommon. Well, that's another way of saying it as well. It's not uncommon, it's not unusual. It's not uncommon is another way people can say it. Alright, now let's move on to 2번. It's all a far cry from the smiling, mild-mannered image many of us have of Thai culture. A far cry from. Now we use a far cry from to suggest that one thing seems totally different from something else. It is often used when the reality of the situation does not live up to expectations. Okay, so a far cry from. Let's run down here. So basically what I've found is that a far cry from 면 뭐 전혀 다른 경험. Alright. Basically what we're saying is to be very different. To be very different. Let's underline very as it is sort of an emphasized expression. So if we look at the example here, Ali's stressful life in the big city was a far cry from the exciting adventure he had imagined. So a far cry from. Remember, meaning very different. So we could say that 알리의 대도시에서의 스트레스 받는 삶은 그가 상상했던 흥미진진한 모험과는 매우 달랐다. Alright, he had a very stressful life in the big city, and it was far from, very different from the exciting adventure he imagined. He thought it was going to be exciting, but it turned out it was stressful. The food in American Chinese restaurants is a far cry from authentic Chinese. Remember, very different. Let's see, like 미국의 중국 음식점의 음식은 종종 진짜 중국 요리와 매우 다르다. Very different from authentic Chinese. Alright, now let's move on to the language focus quiz. 1번. It's not unheard of for athletes to. Remember, not unheard of. So it's not unusual, not uncommon, and it happens from time to time, 가끔. So it's not unheard of for athletes to get injured frequently. So 선수들이 자주 다치는 것은 드문 일이 아닙니다. Not, it happens quite often, sorry. 2번. It's not unheard of for people to when they travel overseas. It's not unheard of for people to get food poisoning when they travel overseas. 사람들이 해외 여행을 가면 식중독에 걸리는 것은 드문 일이 아닙니다. Especially if you go to Thailand or India, I hear there's a lot of people that catch some sort of virus or bug when they're there. 3번. Life in is a far cry from. So remember, a far cry from, very different. Life in Africa is very different from life in, let's say, Asia. So 아프리카에서의 삶은 아시아와 매우 다르다. In 4번. Was a far cry from what I was hoping. Let's keep it easy. The movie was a far cry from what I was hoping for. 그 영화는 내가 기대했던 것과는 많이 달랐어요. Alright, now let's move on to the further discussion. 1번. If vocational schools in Thailand had more balanced mix of genders, do you think it would change the students' behavior? If so, how? 만약 태국의 직업 학교들이 더 균형 잡힌 성별의 혼합을 가지고 있다면 여러분은 그것이 학생들의 행동을 바꿀 것이라고 생각하나요? 만약에 그렇다면 어떻게 해요? That's always the question. Is it better to go to a co-ed school, a mixed gendered school, or is it better to go to an all boys or all girls school? I went to a co-ed or mixed gendered school. I mean, I don't know what it's like to just go to a school with just the one gender. So it's hard for me to imagine what that is like. I mean, it's a very difficult question. I think it might help in some way to develop better, let's say, life skills as well as learning how to interact with the opposite gender, right? Some people who I've met in the past who went to all girls schools or all boys schools, they had trouble adjusting to university because they didn't know how to react around the other gender. So I honestly think that it is beneficial to have mixed gender schools. Maybe, like, to answer the question here, the behavior might have changed because they might have more people interested in each other, and maybe it would make a happier school. It's hard to say. 2번. Do you think that boot camps could still be a good way to handle students who have been caught fighting? Why or why not? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. I know that boot camps are run to help discipline people, but I also know that it doesn't always work. It really just depends on the child's home as well. I think it's not a bad idea. I think if you are a troublemaking student who gets into a lot of fights, you should be doing your best to educate the child in a way where he knows that it's wrong. However, it just depends on how well the boot camp is structured, and also depends on the child's situation at home as well. Anyway, that wraps it up for today's class, and I'll see you on the next class.
Vocational.
Vocational.
Abstract.
Abstract.
Toxic.
Toxic.
Seek out.
Seek out.
Given.
Given.
Anxious.
Anxious.